A teenager was in the sitting room watching television. It was late, something like just after midnight, and she was watching some chat show. Nothing special, and it was only to just something to pass the time. Then the television set started to switch on and off. She looked curiously towards it and then jumped a foot into the air. She stayed still and watched as a figure of two-dimensional imagery emerged from the screen. Tall, muscular, armed with a red cape and a big chin. He introduces himself as Captain Astro and smiles with a small glint from his teeth. Talia Deves awoke with a jump. She was always haunted by the event and it kept reoccurring in her dreams. All those 18 years, and she wanted to keep it all behind. She got ready in her hotel room in Manchester and headed off to the publishing office. She bought herself a morning coffee and headed for work. As she passing through the street, she accidentally bumps her elbow into a man walking the other way and quickly apologizes to him. The man wore a cream linen suit, Hawaiian shirt and bolo tie. He politely says it's okay and continued on. Talia was in a board meeting discussing various stories that were going to published. Britpop and the Royals going to Northern Ireland. After the meeting had finished, Talia went to the toilet and looked at herself at the mirror. She was putting on some lip gloss. As she finished, she saw in her reflection a gangly being with long black and a long green face. It gave a creepy grin at her and Talia turned round, but there was nothing, just the toilet stalls. Talia, freaked out by this, headed out in a bit of rush. Talia left the building and headed off to the local HMV. She was looking through the CD racks, searching for the new bands emerging in the wake of Britpop, and then her eyes got distracted by the same man in the cream linen she met in the morning before work. The man was at the counter discussing various indie bands and if any of them had released their works on vinyl. Talia also noticed a young woman with blonde hair. She looked at her clothes and thought that a retro trend was emerging. She approached her and professionally asked her about her attire. The blonde girl was a bit struck by this and said it's what she usually wears, nothing special or anything. The man turned to Talia and asked her about his suit. Talia jokingly said the man looked like an Oxford professor on vacation. The man gave a small laugh and introduces himself as the doctor. The blonde girl she talked to is called Louisa, and Talia's eyes widen. She's heard of the doctor and his involvement in UNIT. The doctor said to Talia that it's confidential, talking about his sort of recruitment into the task force and that it's behind him. Talia also mentioned that of the doctor's change of appearance, and the doctor held his palm out to keep her silent. The doctor then noticed Talia was a bit tense and asked her if she was okay, like if she was frightened. Talia didn't speak and turned away from the doctor. She walked off and headed back to her hotel room. Later that night, Talia just came out of the bath and sat down looking through the rough drafts of articles she was in the process of writing. Then there was a knock on her door. She hesitated at first and then approached it. She opened the door and in hallway was the doctor and Louisa. He asked her if he could be let in and she accepted. They sat down and the doctor proceeded with a conversation, wanting Talia to vent out her life story. Talia took a deep breath and went on to talk. When she was 16 years old, she watching television late at night when the screen started to go screwy and a two-dimensional cartoon superhero called Captain Astro emerges out. At first she thought he was charming, smiles and everything. But then the other side quickly came out and used a psychic power to hypnotize her. All she remembers after that was he was on top of her and then he disappeared. She didn't tell her parents about the event and kept it quiet. It wasn't until a couple of months later that she started to experience her pregnancy and had to decide whether to go with an abortion or keep it. She chose the latter, but she had to run away from home so her parents wouldn't find out and fled to another state. When it came time to go into labor, the embryo was, let's say, chaotic and was trying to punch its way out, which became torturous for her. The surgeons had to perform a cesarean section to release the newborn and it paid off. It was a boy and she called it Daniel. But with the trauma she experienced, she decided to give her son up and take it to an orphanage run by nuns. There she washed her hands of it and moved on course to her own future. She ended up becoming an up-and-coming journalist, as it was something she dreamed of pursuing. Louisa was gobsmacked by this, and the doctor said that she brought a hybrid of two-dimensional prepositions to the world because of her reluctance in dealing with a sinister event but keeping the child alive rather than killing it. Talia said she doesn't believe in abortions and never has. The doctor then asked if she was having nightmares or visions of Daniel, and Talia said yes, very recently in fact. It feels like she's being stalked by her own flesh and blood. She thinks she's going mad, but the doctor thinks that Daniel is looking for her. A psychic link between mother and son. Talia is tensely skeptical about this but comes a realization that after all those years her son is trying to reunite with her. Louisa chimes in that orphaned children tend to look for their birth mothers and in the end it can go two different ways, either positive or negative. Talia had a long thought and decided as a divisive opportunity to try to reunite with Daniel. The doctor knew a hidden place in Manchester and that Daniel might be there. Talia asked why it's a hidden place. The doctor said he'll show her what it really is and it will mind-blowing to some degree. Talia accepts this and the doctor says he'll take her tomorrow night. The doctor, Louisa and Talia went into Canal Street. The doctor said he'd been here before in the sixth incarnation and Louisa questioned what his sixth self was like. The doctor said his sixth life was arrogant with a flamboyant edge and grudgingly but passively mentioned that patchwork coat. They entered a club called Manto and ordered a drink or two. The doctor then noticed an array of framed photos near the left side of the bar of his sixth incarnation and it was a shrine of his frequent visits to the street. After all, he was an icon of the gay community, even becoming an ambassador for gay pride, and he continued looking through the photos. Pictures of him and Mel partying with the LGBT community. After a while the doctor took Talia and Louisa to a back alley behind Manto. There was a large set of door in a rust brown color and then he knocked on it. A slide opened and asked him something and he then exchanged something gibberish. The door opened and the doctor let Talia in. Louisa followed also in and came into a large warehouse-type club. The doctor welcomed Talia to the sanctuary, a haven for two-dimensional characters who have immigrated in the real via reality rifts and have become hidden from society. Some of the two-dimensional characters greeted the doctor and mentioned that he changed his face again. The doctor chimed in saying last time he was here he was wearing a question mark pullover and a battered Panama hat. They went on discussing Mel saying about her always positive smile, her dress sense and that red hair. Oh how they love that hair, and the doctor laughed and said she's traveling with a robe called Sabulum Glitz. He then introduces Louisa to them. She was quite surprised at first glance but gleefully come to appreciate their livelihood and not being found out from the general public. Talia was slowly walking through the sea of colorful characters. Her mind was racing and it felt like she was scared. Looking at them made her felt uneasy because of her teenage trauma and then she froze. She saw Captain Astro nearby drinking a glass of whiskey and turned away from him. The doctor and Louisa came to her and told them. The doctor looked on at Captain Astro and said they can leave the sanctuary. Talia started to shed a few tears and agreed. As they approached the entrance the lights suddenly went out and the two-dimensional characters screamed out loud. Falling sounds were heard and the doctor used the sonic screwdriver to turn the power back on. The lights turned on and the doctor and Louisa were surrounded by corpses. All the members of the sanctuary were killed and Louisa noticed Talia had disappeared. The doctor wondered who can have done this and then heard Talia's screech coming from outside. Daniel had kidnapped her from the sanctuary and taken her to a nearby canal bridge. He stroked her hair and was pleased that he found his mother. Talia stared at him with hairs standing on her neck and didn't utter a word. Daniel told her that she left him with those nuns, constantly punished because of his appearance, and that he used to bite the other children out of anger. His body was fluctuating from 2D to 3D and then let out a gasp. He burned down the orphanage, killing the nuns and the children. He scavenged the world looking for her and finally he's found her. Talia brought up courage and asked what his reason for looking for her. Daniel utters the spiteful words, to kill her and to be fully formed, either in a 2D or 3D environment. He killed the members of the sanctuary because of his father was in hiding like the rest of them and wanted to break his link to him. Now he's found the other half and plans to do the same. He brings out a sharp hunting knife and points it at her face. He said the reunion was nice but now it's time to end it and was preparing to thrust the knife into Talia. The doctor and Louisa walk in on the oncoming killing and the doctor shouted down at Daniel. Daniel quickly faced him and sneered at him. He mocks the doctor for organizing the sanctuary and keeping them like ants. The doctor said it was the only solution and it was either the government would get involved to do sinister things to them. Daniel turned to Talia and looked back at him. He said he needs to do this. The only way to make his existence more formidable than temporary, and that's his goal. The doctor offered him the opportunity to take him to a world which he can thrive in his own existence, but Daniel flat out refuses and spits on the doctor's linen suit. Talia got up quietly and quickly grabbed Daniel's hand with the knife. She stabs him in the side and Daniel screams while fluctuated at the same time. This leads to a scuffle between the two and both fall into the canal. Talia was being dragged down into the water by Daniel and was kicking him rapidly to escape his grasp. The doctor dived into the canal and Louisa watched on. The doctor grabbed Talia and hoisted her up to the surface. They reached the surface and Talia held onto the doctor. They couldn't see Daniel, but a bright green light was in the water and it turns out that Daniel drowned. Talia had a strong sense of relief but also burden. She killed her son and will have to accept the terms. Louisa helped the doctor and Talia out the canal. The doctor told Talia to go back to her hotel room and Talia walked off, not saying anything but nodded her head. A few months later Talia returned back to the States, still continuing with her journalism, and began to go to therapy. She accepted Daniel's death as a bridge to a better life. The weight had been lifted and she seemed to be on the path for more brighter things to come. Sadly, in November that year she died in a plane crash and early the next month her funeral took place. The doctor and Louisa were there. The doctor placed a white rose down on her coffin and put his hand on his heart. He didn't cry and kept a straight face. Louisa put her hand on the coffin and shedded a couple of tears. She didn't like funerals. Too depressing, and the loved ones become emotions wrecks even if they've entered through church doorways. The doctor and Louisa sat down at the back of the church. The priest began the farewell. The gathering for Talia Deves to go on to the other side and it begun.